The arsenal of World War II, weapons, women, and the war effort. Ever wonder why women weren't allowed to fight in World War II, yet ended up holding the entire war effort on their shoulders? Picture this. It's 1942. Inside a massive factory in Detroit, metal hammers against metal. Sparks explode like tiny fireworks. Welding torches glow against endless rows of machinery. But look closer. These aren't soldiers building weapons of war. They're women, mothers, wives, daughters. Most of them had never set foot in a factory before. World War II wasn't only won in Europe or the Pacific. It was won right here in factories, foundries, and assembly lines. And the story of America's most iconic weapons cannot be told without the women who built them, all while navigating the most personal, most complicated parts of their lives during the greatest conflict in human history. Today, we're diving deep into the industrial machine that armed the Allies, the legendary weapons that changed warfare, and the untold story of the women whose hands forged the arsenal of democracy. Part 1. The Industrial Mobilization. When war erupted in Europe in 1939, America was not ready. The Great Depression had crushed industry, and the military was still using equipment from World War I. But then came Pearl Harbor, and everything changed overnight. President Roosevelt made a call to the nation, become the arsenal of democracy. The numbers he demanded seemed impossible. In 1941, America produced 4,000 aircraft. By 1944, 96,000 a year. Tank production skyrocketed from almost nothing to 88,000. How? Simple. The entire economy transformed. Car companies stopped making cars and started making tanks. Typewriter companies made machine guns. A cash register company produced artillery shells. One of the most incredible examples was the Liberty ships, the cargo lifeline to Europe. Before the war, it took almost a year to build one. Henry Kaiser changed everything. He applied assembly line techniques and got that number down to 42 days, and one ship was famously completed in just 4 days and 15 hours. But none of that would have been possible without one thing: labor. Millions of men were gone. 16 million served in the military. The workforce had to double fast, and that meant women. Part 2. The M1 Garand, Engineering Excellence. Narrator. Now let's talk about one of the most important weapons of the war, the M1 Garand rifle. General George Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. Why? Because it was semi-automatic. One trigger pull, one shot, and the rifle loaded the next round automatically. German and Japanese soldiers were still using bolt-action rifles, far slower in a firefight, but manufacturing the Garand, that was a whole different battle. Over 50 precision parts. A 12-pound hunk of forged steel machined down to a 2-pound receiver, with tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Factories across the nation had to work together. Every part had to be interchangeable. A barrel made in Illinois had to fit a stock from Michigan, and a trigger group from Massachusetts perfectly. This required new quality control methods, new workflows, and new levels of precision. By the end of the war, over 4 million rifles had been produced. And behind that production line, increasingly women. Part 3. Women in the factories. Before the war, only a quarter of American women worked outside the home. Industrial work? Almost unheard of. By 1943, women made up 65% of the aviation workforce. Some munitions plants? 90% women. Rosie the Riveter became the face of the movement. The poster said, "We can do it." But the reality? It was brutal. 10 to 12-hour shifts. 6 or 7 days a week. Cramped spaces inside bomber wings. Deafening noise. Explosive materials that could kill instantly. In munitions plants, women known as powder monkeys filled artillery shells with explosive powder work. So dangerous, they wore special static-free clothes. Accidents still happened. One explosion at the Elwood Ordnance Plant in 1942 killed dozens, mostly women. But these women proved themselves. They excelled at precision work. They adapted quickly. And they kept production running at levels the world had never seen. All this while usually being paid only 60% of what men earn for the same jobs. Part 4. The B-17 Flying Fortress. Narrator. Now, let's look at one of the most iconic weapons of World War II, the B-17 Flying Fortress. This four-engine bomber was the backbone of America's daylight bombing campaign, and building it was a monumental task. 47,000 rivets, miles of wiring, over 100 aluminum panels for the nose alone. Boeing and its partner factories created assembly line systems that turned the B-17 into a mass-produced giant. At peak speed, they rolled out one plane every hour. Women played a huge role in this. They crawled through tight spaces installing wires, controls, and oxygen systems. They worked in confined ball turret section, a job that required unbelievable dexterity. The Flying Fortress didn't just fly because of engineering. It flew because women built it. Part 5: Life, Love, and Family during wartime. Now, here's the part of the story that doesn't make it into textbooks. These women weren't just workers. They had lives, feelings, relationships, and the war changed everything. Before deployment, millions of couples rushed into marriage. Then came years of separation. Women worked exhausting shifts while raising children alone, waiting for letters that sometimes took weeks, letters that were censored. Some couples stayed faithful through it all. Others didn't on both sides. It was a painful reality rarely spoken about. Pregnancy during wartime was common. Many women became mothers while their husbands were overseas for years. Daycare centers funded by the government became essential, allowing mothers to work their shifts and still provide for their families. Unmarried women found new independence earning money, living in boarding houses, building friendships and networks. But the social rules of the time were still harsh. Unwed pregnancy brought stigma. Some women went to maternity homes. Others sought illegal abortions. It was a world where women often had to rely on each other for support and information. Despite everything, they formed communities. They looked out for each other. They kept the country running. And it wasn't just rifles and bombers. The Thompson submachine gun iconic. The .50 caliber Browning machine gun, so effective it's still used today. The Sherman tank, not the strongest tank of the war, but reliable and built in staggering numbers. Behind every one of these weapons, women in factories across the nation who transformed themselves from homemakers to industrial workers almost overnight. World War II was won through more than military strength. It was won through industry, through innovation, and through people, especially the women who stepped into roles society never intended for them. They built the planes that flew into battle, the rifles that infantry carried across Europe and the Pacific, the ships that transported armies, the tanks that broke through enemy lines. When the war ended, many of these women were told to go back home. But everything had changed. They had changed. They had proven their strength, their skill, and their place in the workforce. The weapons won the battles, but the people who made them, especially the women, won the war. Their story deserves to be remembered, because without them, the arsenal of democracy would never have existed, and history might look very different.